The Bible is full of powerful stories and symbols, but few are as mysterious as Jacob's ladder, an ancient secret that has remained hidden for centuries, until now. What does that ladder that connected earth to heaven really mean? What did God want to reveal to us through that dream? While many think they understand its symbolism, the truth behind this vision goes far beyond what we imagine. Imagine discovering that this dream contains a divine message that can transform your life today, something you may never have noticed in the scriptures. Get ready to explore one of the greatest biblical mysteries and understand how this revelation can open new spiritual paths for you. Jacob was on the run, a man marked by fear, carrying with him the consequences of his own actions. Leaving the comfort of his home behind, he headed towards an uncertain, directionless future. In the midst of this loneliness, he lies down on the barren ground with only a stone as a pillow. What he didn't yet know was that that night would be the beginning of one of the most powerful spiritual experiences ever recorded. The story of the ladder that connected heaven to earth would not be just any dream, but a sign that his life was about to change forever. In the silence of the night, Jacob fell asleep, and that's when the mystery revealed itself. In an almost palpable dream, he saw a staircase that reached the heavens, with angels ascending and descending it, a symbol of something much bigger, deeper, that few to this day can fully understand. What does this ladder mean? Why did she appear in that moment of despair and fear? And most importantly, what can it teach us about what happens when heaven touches earth? It is often in the midst of chaos and confusion that the greatest revelations happen. Jacob, who was fleeing his own life, was surprised by a divine message that would change the course of his journey. This type of situation makes us reflect. How many times do we feel lost, without direction? And it is precisely in these moments that something extraordinary happens. Perhaps Jacob's ladder is more than a distant dream. Perhaps it is a reminder that even when everything seems to be falling apart, there is a hidden path that connects us to the divine. What happened that night at Bethel was not just an isolated sight. It was a promise. God, in His infinite wisdom, spoke to Jacob directly, reaffirming a covenant that would shape the destiny of not just Jacob, but an entire nation. What does this promise mean for us today? The ladder that Jacob saw still exists, invisibly, ready to be climbed by those seeking a deeper connection with the divine. And, like him, each of us may be closer to this meeting than we imagine. Bethel was not just any point on Jacob's path. That place carried a deep meaning, as if heaven itself had chosen that soil. Bethel, whose name means house of God, was the stage for a supernatural encounter between the divine and the human. In that desert, where loneliness reigned and the land seemed to promise nothing, God manifested Himself. This leads us to an intriguing question. Why did God choose this place? What is special about Bethel that makes it so important to spiritual history? Perhaps Bethel is more than a geographic location. Maybe it represents all the places in our lives where we least expect to find answers. It is in the silence of the deserts of the soul that God sometimes reveals Himself most powerfully. The ladder seen by Jacob symbolized this direct connection between heaven and earth. The angels that went up and down it brought the message that, even in the midst of emptiness, there was a spiritual bridge that connected us to the divine. Bethel, then, becomes the symbol of hope in the midst of darkness. Jacob, upon waking up, recognized the importance of that place. Not only had he dreamed of a ladder, but he had experienced a divine revelation. From that moment on, Bethel would never be the same. He erected a stone as a memorial, a sign that there, in this forgotten part of the world, the heavens opened. And today, in our lives, we can also find our Bethais, those moments of revelation that completely transform our perspective. Have you ever stopped to think about your meeting places with the divine? God always chooses unexpected places for great revelations. And no matter where we are or what we are facing, there is always a Bethel waiting for us, a meeting point where heaven and earth touch. Just as happened with Jacob, these encounters transform our journey, reminding us that we are never alone, even when everything seems lost. And with that, a new question arises. What did this ladder really symbolize for Jacob? And how does this impact our understanding of what is sacred? The ladder that Jacob saw was no ordinary ladder. Its steps were not made of wood or stone, but rather a direct path to heaven, a portal between the physical and spiritual worlds. What was most impressive about this vision was the constant movement, angels ascending and descending in an infinite cycle. These angels, messengers of God, seemed to carry out a sacred mission, as if they were the bearers of promises and destinies. But what did this ladder really mean? Would it be an invitation for us, humans, to also reach the divine? In many cultures and religions, stairs are seen as symbols of ascension, of spiritual progress. In Jacob's dream, the ladder symbolized more than just a personal journey. It was a sign that the path to heaven was open, but that it would not be easy. There were steps to be climbed, challenges to be faced. Climbing this ladder meant a complete transformation, an effort to get closer to God. What can we learn from this? Perhaps Jacob's ladder is an invitation for all of us to also begin our own journey of spiritual ascension. But what about angels? Who were they, and what was their role? According to Jewish tradition, the angels who went up and down the ladder were, in a way, monitoring the fulfillment of God's promises. They represented the bridge between the divine and the human, ensuring that the promises made to Jacob would be fulfilled. And this leads us to wonder, are there still angels in our lives today, going up and down invisible stairs, guiding us, protecting us, and fulfilling divine purposes on our path? The ladder vision teaches us that heaven and earth are connected, and that there is a constant cycle of communication between these two worlds. Just as the angels ascended and descended, we too can participate in this divine exchange. Jacob's ladder reminds us that the spiritual life is a journey of ascension, an ongoing effort to rise above the mundane and connect with the divine. The next step for Jacob would be to understand what God had to say. And what did he reveal on that mysterious night? At that crucial moment, when the ladder was no longer just a symbol, but a tangible reality, God spoke directly to Jacob. His words echoed like an unbreakable pact, a divine covenant that transcended time and space. God promised Jacob something that not even he could imagine: a vast and prosperous land for his descendants, and a protection that would accompany him wherever he went. The weight of this promise is gigantic, and it was not just for Jacob, but for his entire lineage, the beginning of a new era for his people. God's promise to Jacob was not vague or generic. It was direct, clear, and full of intentions. The land upon which Jacob rested would be his, but more than that, his descendants would scatter like the dust of the earth, reaching the four corners of the world. It's fascinating to think about how this promise, made in a moment of vulnerability, shaped the course of history. Jacob, a man on the run, was now destined to be the patriarch of an entire nation. What does this teach us? Perhaps it's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, God's promises can be greater than our dreams. But the promise did not just involve land and descendants. God assured Jacob that he would be with him at all times, protecting him and guiding him on his journey. This constant presence is something many of us long for in our own lives. Knowing that, despite the challenges and uncertainties, there is a greater force accompanying us can bring peace in times of chaos. God's pact with Jacob is proof that when we are chosen for something greater, divine protection never abandons us, even in the most unpredictable situations. Finally, the promise made to Jacob is a reflection of God's covenant with all humanity. It is a message of hope that there is always a direct connection with the divine, even when we feel lost. Just as Jacob received a promise that would guide his life, we can also open ourselves to hear the promises that God has for each of us. But first of all, Jacob needed to face the harsh reality of his escape and the uncertainty of what was to come. What did the future hold for him? Jacob was a man on the run, running away from his own history, from the mistakes that led him to deceive his brother Esau. He ran away from what he knew. The weight of guilt and fear of reprisal accompanied him at every step. Feeling persecuted, alone, and without a clear destination is something that many have experienced in times of crisis. Jacob was at a breaking point, and it was in this state of vulnerability that the supernatural revealed itself to him. When it seemed like everything was lost, the divine encounter reached him, changing the course of his journey. Jacob's escape was not just physical, it was also emotional and spiritual. He was running away from his own choices and the past that haunted him. And how many of us don't do the same? We run away from poorly made decisions, from broken promises, from mistakes we made along the way. But, like Jacob, we cannot escape our destiny. It was in the middle of his escape that the unexpected happened. God, with all his wisdom, used that moment of fragility to bring a message of redemption and purpose. The encounter with the supernatural in the midst of Jacob's escape was no coincidence. It is often in our moments of greatest despair that the divine manifests itself most clearly. When all the doors seem closed, that's when God shows us a path that we hadn't noticed before. For Jacob, this path was symbolized by the ladder that connected heaven to earth, a sign that no matter how distant we feel, there is always a direct connection with the divine waiting to be discovered. The story of Jacob teaches us that even on the run, the supernatural can find us. And no matter how hard we run, there are times when we are forced to confront what torments us. Jacob needed to face his reality and accept the fact that there was something bigger than himself guiding him. That dream, that ladder, and that promise were proof that even when we are lost, there is a divine plan in progress. And now, with this promise in hand, Jacob needed to continue his journey, knowing that he was no longer alone. The angels that Jacob saw on the ladder were not there by chance. They rose and fell, moving with a clear and precise mission, as if each step was part of a larger plan. Who were these celestial beings? Throughout the Bible, angels are seen as messengers of God, bearers of good news, but also as guardians, protectors of those who follow the divine paths. In Jacob's vision, these angels represented a direct connection between heaven and earth, ensuring that God's promises would be fulfilled. Messengers or guardians? Maybe it was both. Throughout the scriptures, angels appear in moments of great importance, whether to announce the birth of a savior or to protect God's chosen ones. With Jacob, they fulfilled the role of divine messengers, reminding him that even in his flight he was never truly alone. These angels, ascending and descending the ladder, were the symbol of God's constant presence in his life, ensuring that the promises made to him were carried forward. But what does this mean for us today? Perhaps we still have our own angels around us, invisible but present, guiding our steps and protecting our journeys. Often, in the most difficult moments, we can feel like there is something or someone holding us back, guiding us towards a greater destiny. The angels in Jacob's vision were not just there to watch. They were active, constantly moving, just like the divine purpose in our lives, always working, even when we don't realize it. This vision teaches us that the divine is always within our reach, and that there are invisible forces that protect and guide us. Just as Jacob did not fully understand the role of those angels in his life, we too often do not understand the forces that protect us. However, Jacob's ladder reminds us that even when everything seems uncertain, there is a direct connection with the divine. And there are always guardians ensuring that God's promises are fulfilled on our journey. Jacob's ladder was not just a vision. It was a profound symbol of hope. The connection between heaven and earth that it represented carried a clear message. The divine is not distant, but accessible. For Jacob, who was in the midst of a desperate escape, this revelation was a breath of relief. The presence of God, visible in the image of the angels ascending and descending, was a sign that, despite his failures and mistakes, he was not abandoned. And for us, that ladder remains a powerful reminder that there is always hope, even when the path seems lost. This connection with heaven also teaches us something fundamental. The divine is closer to us than we can imagine. Jacob's ladder is a metaphor for the bridge between the human and the heavenly, a path of direct communication between God and those who seek Him. Just like Jacob, in moments of despair, we often feel disconnected, as if our prayers are not being heard. But the staircase reminds us that access to heaven is always open, ready to welcome us. No matter how far away we feel, there is always a way back. The sign of hope that Jacob's ladder brings is not just for him, but for all who seek a deeper connection with the divine. This image makes us reflect on our own lives and the ways in which we connect with the spiritual. Are we aware of the ladders that appear on our path, inviting us to climb and get closer to God? Often, these opportunities come in unexpected ways, but they are there, waiting to be discovered, reminding us that the divine is never out of reach. Jacob's ladder, then, is more than a dream. It is an invitation to see beyond the immediate difficulties and to remember that there is always a way up. This connection to heaven is a sign that no matter how lonely we may feel, we are never truly alone. And Jacob's journey, guided by this vision, teaches us that the divine is always working in our lives, even in the most uncertain moments. The ladder that Jacob saw in his dream carries a hidden message, a lesson that goes beyond the obvious. On its surface, the ladder is a symbol of connection between heaven and earth, but its meaning extends much further. It represents a spiritual journey, a path of ascension that we are all invited to follow. Climbing this ladder is not just a physical movement, but a spiritual process, where each step brings us closer to the divine and distances us from our earthly limitations. The ladder symbolizes the continuous effort we need to make to grow spiritually. This concept of spiritual ascension is universal. No matter the starting point, there is always a way up. Jacob's ladder is a reminder that the process of growing spiritually does not happen all at once, but step by step. Every step we take toward heaven is a choice, a conscious decision to move closer to something greater. And just like Jacob, who was on the run and filled with uncertainty, we can also find the strength to climb this ladder in our most challenging moments. But what happens when we start to climb? Jacob's ladder also symbolizes the constant interaction between the divine and the human. The angels that ascended and descended show us that this communication is never interrupted. God is always on the move in our lives, calling us to a deeper relationship with Him. However, this calling requires action on our part. The ladder is not static. She demands that we go up. So the hidden message is clear. We need to be willing to move towards the divine, even if the path is long and challenging. The journey of faith that the ladder symbolizes also reminds us that although God is always present, true transformation happens when we accept the invitation to climb. Each step we climb brings us closer to a deeper understanding of who we are and our connection with the divine. Jacob's ladder teaches us that spiritual life is an ongoing journey, and that there is always more to learn, more to discover. Are we ready to start this climb? When Jacob woke up from that dream, he knew something monumental had happened. This was no ordinary place. Bethel, where he had lain, had become holy. But what turned that deserted spot into an altar was the stone he had used as a pillow. Jacob, in a gesture of deep reverence, raised that stone as a marker of his covenant with God. The stone, simple and rustic, became an altar, a powerful symbol of commitment and faith. There, in Bethel, Jacob marked the beginning of a new phase of his journey, now guided by the divine promise. This stone was more than just a physical reminder of that extraordinary moment. It represented the transformation of a common place into a holy place. Bethel, which was once just another point on Jacob's journey, was now the center of a covenant with God. In the story, we see how simple objects, like a stone, can be charged with spiritual meaning. And how often in our own lives do objects or places gain new meanings from the experiences we have in them? Bethel is the reminder that the divine can manifest itself in the most unexpected places and situations. Jacob did not build that altar just for himself, but for future generations. The stone, raised as a memorial, became a sign for Jacob's descendants, physical proof of the commitment between him and God. When we raise our own altars, whether physical or spiritual, we leave marks that impact not only our journey, but also those who come after us. Just like Jacob, we are invited to transform our moments of encounter with the divine into milestones that remind us of God's presence in our lives. The altar at Bethel teaches us a valuable lesson: the importance of recognizing and honoring the moments when God reveals Himself to us. Whether through a standing stone, a silent prayer, or a decision of faith, these moments are sacred and should be remembered. And it is in this spirit of gratitude that we continue with the story of Jacob, knowing that God's promise did not end there, but was just beginning. What else would God reveal on your journey? The promise God made to Jacob that night at Bethel was not just for him. It extended to his descendants, transforming Jacob into the patriarch of a nation. Their children, their grandchildren, and all generations to come would carry the legacy of that staircase with them. Jacob's vision was a foreshadowing that something greater was afoot, something beyond his own life. Through him, a nation would be formed, and that nation would bring with it the spiritual heritage of the ladder, the ongoing connection with the divine. Jacob's descendants, who would later form the 12 tribes of Israel, would carry out God's promise. Every step taken by Jacob on that journey would be reflected in the steps of his children, and not just in the conquest of lands, but in the search for a life of faith, in the intimate relationship with the divine that ladder represented. The future of an entire nation was sealed at Bethel, where Jacob, a man on the run, became the keeper of an everlasting covenant. This story of Jacob and his descendants shows us how our actions and spiritual encounters can resonate with future generations. What we do today, the decisions of faith we make, shape not only our destiny, but the destiny of those who follow us. Just like Jacob, each of us has the opportunity to build a legacy of faith, a legacy that can transcend time and impact lives beyond our own. Are we aware of the impact of our spiritual decisions on future generations? The future that was born on that ladder was a future of promise and purpose. Jacob, by hearing God's voice and committing himself to his covenant, not only secured his own protection, but planted the seed of a nation that would carry divine light. The ladder, with its angels ascending and descending, would become the symbol of the eternal connection between God and Jacob's descendants. And this promise, so ancient, continues to inspire us today, inviting us to reflect on what we are building for those who will come after us. The vision of Jacob's ladder has been interpreted in various ways throughout history. Each generation, each culture, sought a deeper meaning for this moment, trying to understand what the ladder really represented. For some, it was literally a ladder, a physical path that connected heaven to earth. For others, The ladder was a powerful metaphor for spiritual ascension, symbolizing each person's journey toward the divine. But which of these interpretations comes closest to the truth? Or are they both correct on different levels? Theologians, scholars, and mystics throughout the centuries agree that the ladder represents more than a physical object. It is a symbol of transcendence, of how man can rise spiritually and get closer to God. Many see it as a continuous connection, an eternal cycle of communication between the divine and the human. This interpretation gives the staircase an even deeper meaning. It not only connects, but also transforms. Every time we climb a step, we are leaving something of the world behind and getting closer to the sacred. Some spiritual traditions interpret Jacob's ladder as a universal archetype of transformation. It connects to other images of stairs and ziggurats that appear in ancient cultures, all symbolizing the ascension to the divine. This parallel between Jacob's ladder and structures such as the Tower of Babel, for example, makes us reflect on the different paths that humanity has sought to reach heaven. However, while Babel was a human effort to reach God, Jacob's ladder was a divine initiative, showing that spiritual connection can only be achieved through God's will. Ultimately, Jacob's ladder becomes a universal symbol of spiritual quest and encounter with the divine. It transcends time and culture, remaining a rich metaphor for the spiritual journey of every human being. And as we explore these interpretations throughout the story, one thing remains clear. The ladder is an invitation for all to climb and find a deeper connection with the divine. But are we prepared to accept this invitation and embark on this journey of transformation? The image of a ladder connecting heaven and earth is not exclusive to the story of Jacob. In several ancient cultures, we find similar archetypes, such as the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, structures that aim to bring man closer to the gods. These stairs, whether physical or symbolic, have always represented the human desire to transcend the material world and achieve something higher. Jacob's ladder, with its angels ascending and descending, echoes this universal quest, but with one essential difference. It was revealed by God, not constructed by man. Ziggurats, for example, were immense stepped towers, true stairs that connected earth to heaven, allowing priests to have a closer connection with the gods. The Tower of Babel, as described in the Bible, also resembles these structures, although its intention was opposite to that of Jacob's ladder. While Babel represented the human arrogance of wanting to reach the divine by one's own strength, Jacob's ladder was a divine gift, a God-given bridge, showing that true spiritual connection comes from His will, not human efforts. This archetype of the ladder, or path of spiritual ascension, can also be found in the pyramids of Egypt, whose pointed shapes suggested an ascension to heaven. The idea that there is a vertical path, a process of elevation, is something that has permeated the human imagination since time immemorial. But Jacob's ladder stands out because it requires no monumental human effort or physical construction. It is a symbol that spiritual ascension is within everyone's reach, once God opens the way. The comparison between these ancient stairs and Jacob's vision makes us reflect on the human desire to reach the divine. In such different cultures, man has always looked for ways to rise, to elevate himself spiritually. However, the story of Jacob reminds us that true spiritual ascension is not something we build alone. God has already provided the way, and our only task is to climb, one step at a time, with faith and humility. Are we willing to accept this simple but profound truth? Jacob's ladder is not just a remote vision in time. It remains a relevant symbol for our spiritual quest today. Just like Jacob, we are all in search of something greater, a deeper connection with the divine. The ladder symbolizes this journey, where each step represents a stage of growth and learning. The path to God is always a search, a continuous effort to rise spiritually, leaving behind what binds us to the material world. Every step we take in this direction brings us closer to the true essence of the divine. Ascending spiritually, however, is not an easy task. Just as climbing a mountain requires effort, perseverance, and resistance, the journey towards God also requires dedication. We often encounter obstacles, moments when the climb seems too difficult, but it is precisely in these moments that faith becomes our strength. Jacob's ladder reminds us that no matter how challenging the path may be, there is always a divine hand guiding us. God not only puts the ladder in our path, but also gives us the support we need to climb. What does it mean to ascend spiritually? It means seeking a life of purpose, of meaning, in constant connection with the divine. This is not an isolated path, but a daily process of transformation. With each step we climb, we become more aware of our own spirituality, more open to God's love and wisdom. This path is individual, but it is also universal. We are all called to rise, to seek this connection with the divine, each one at our own pace, but always with the same objective, reaching the presence of God. Jacob's ladder teaches us that this spiritual quest is ongoing and open to everyone. No matter where we are on our journey, there are always more steps to climb, more lessons to learn. True spirituality is not something we achieve once and for all, but something we cultivate throughout our lives. And just like Jacob, who saw the ladder in a moment of crisis, it is often in our most challenging moments that we find the drive to keep climbing. Are we ready to take the next step? Dreams and visions in the Bible have always been a form of communication between God and men. In times of silence and uncertainty, it was through dreams that the divine revealed itself, guiding and bringing messages that often changed the course of history. Jacob's vision with the ladder was one of those pivotal moments, but he wasn't the only one. The Bible is full of examples where God used dreams and visions to speak to those who were willing to listen. This is the power of divine language, a form of communication that goes beyond words and touches the depths of the soul. Just like Jacob, other great biblical characters also received revelations through dreams. Joseph, Jacob's son, interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, guaranteeing Israel's future in the midst of famine. Daniel, in Babylonian exile, had visions that revealed the destiny of the nations. These examples show that dreams in the Bible are more than just nighttime images. They are vehicles of revelation, bringing to light truths that would not otherwise be known. For Jacob, the dream of the ladder was the turning point in his life, a clear message that his journey was being watched and guided by God Himself. Dreams also teach us about the power of faith. It is not always easy to understand what we see or experience in moments of revelation. Jacob, for example, did not fully understand the meaning of his dream right away, but he trusted God's promise. This shows us that faith is often necessary to decipher the messages we receive. Like Jacob, we are called to trust that even when we don't fully understand, God is working in our lives in unseen ways through dreams, visions, and spiritual experiences. The divine language of dreams is a form of communication that goes beyond the rational and connects directly with the spiritual. She calls us to be open to receiving these messages, even if sometimes they don't make immediate sense. Just like Jacob, we must be attentive to revelations that may come during the night, at the most unexpected moments, as they may contain answers, directions, and promises for our lives. And it is from this trust that Jacob's journey continued, guided by a dream that changed everything. Angels have always played a fundamental role in the divine plan, acting as messengers and guardians between God and humanity. In Jacob's vision, they went up and down the stairs, in an incessant movement, as if they carried with them the prayers of men and the answers of God. Angels were not passive figures, but active agents in fulfilling divine promises. What does this movement mean? It shows us that communication between heaven and earth is constantly active, and angels are responsible for keeping this connection alive. In the divine plan, angels are often sent at critical moments to protect, guide, and bring messages that change the destiny of those to whom they are sent. In the Old Testament, we see angels protecting God's people, as in the case of Daniel in the lion's den, or bringing powerful messages, as with the prophet Elijah. Jacob's ladder reveals to us that, as in other crucial moments in the Bible, angels were present to ensure that the covenant between God and Jacob was fulfilled. They were more than observers. They were executors of the divine will. The symbolism of angels goes beyond their role as messengers. They are also a representation of God's closeness to humanity. The fact that angels ascended and descended in Jacob's vision reinforces the idea that the divine is always within our reach, even if we don't see it clearly. Many times in our own lives, we can feel this invisible presence, as if something guides or protects us in times of difficulty. This leads us to reflect. How many times are we touched by these divine forces without realizing it? The angels in Jacob's vision remind us that the divine plan is in continuous action, and that even in moments when we feel alone or helpless, there is a heavenly movement on our behalf. They are the guarantee that God is present, acting in an invisible but real way in our lives. Jacob's ladder, with its angels ascending and descending, teaches us that regardless of where we are or what we face, there is always a spiritual bridge that connects us to heaven, and angels are the guardians of that connection. The promise that God made to Jacob that night at Bethel was one of the most powerful and comprehensive in the entire Bible. It was not just a guarantee of material prosperity, but a pact of provision and protection that would extend for generations. God promised Jacob that he would be with him at all times, that he would guide and protect him wherever he went. This promise, in addition to being an immediate consolation for Jacob in his escape, was a sign that God's hand would be present at every step of his journey. What more can we want in our own spiritual walk than this certainty that God walks with us? God's covenant with Jacob involved the promise of land and numerous descendants, but the most profound element of this covenant was the guarantee that God would not abandon him. Amid all the dangers and uncertainties, Jacob was sure that God himself would protect him. How many times in our own lives have we longed for that same reassurance, that regardless of the challenges, there is a greater force guiding and protecting us? The story of Jacob teaches us that this divine protection is real and within our reach. In addition to protection, the promise also involved provision. God would not only accompany Jacob, but also provide everything he needed to fulfill his purpose. This covenant reminds us that true sustenance comes from God. Just like Jacob, who set out not knowing where he was going, but confident that God would provide, we are called to trust that, on our own journey, God will take care of our every need. This trust in divine provision is one of the pillars of faith, and Jacob is a clear example of how this faith can transform lives. Ultimately, this promise of provision and protection was not just for Jacob, but for all of his descendants. God was establishing an eternal covenant, which would guarantee that Jacob's future generations would continue to receive his blessing. And it is this promise that spans the centuries and reaches us today. God's covenant with Jacob reminds us that regardless of circumstances, we can count on divine protection and provision in our own spiritual journey. Jacob's journey was just beginning, and he held in his hands a promise that would change the destiny of a nation. The vision of Jacob's ladder is not just an isolated event in the Old Testament, but it carries with it a deep connection to the New Testament and the figure of Jesus Christ. In John 50, Jesus makes a direct reference to Jacob's ladder, stating that, "You will see heaven opened, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." Here, Christ stands as the definitive bridge between heaven and earth, fulfilling the promise that the connection between the divine and the human would be maintained forever. Jacob's ladder was a harbinger of the coming of Jesus, who would establish an eternal path for humanity to reconnect with God. This connection between Jacob's ladder and Jesus Christ is deep and symbolic. The ladder seen by Jacob was a glimpse of what was to come, a mediator who would unite heaven and earth definitively. Just as the angels ascended and descended on Jacob's ladder, they now ascended and descended on the Son of Man, Jesus, who has become the way through which all can access the Father. The promise made to Jacob that night in Bethel is fulfilled in full way in Christ, showing that the history of salvation began much earlier and that God always planned this reconciliation. In the New Testament, Jacob's ladder is reinterpreted as a symbol of Christ's work, which invites us to climb toward heaven through Him. Jesus is the new and living way, the one that takes us directly to the Father, without human intermediaries, but with a divine connection open to everyone. Jacob's ladder reminds us that God has always been willing to approach humanity, and that, with the coming of Jesus, this approach became accessible to everyone, regardless of their origins or circumstances. The legacy of Jacob's ladder, therefore, is a legacy of hope, promise, and reconciliation. What began as a dream on a lonely night came to fruition centuries later, with the coming of Christ. The story of Jacob and his ladder continues to teach us that God never abandons us, that there is always a bridge between heaven and earth. And now, with Jesus, this bridge has become a living and present reality, inviting us to climb, to get closer to God, and to live in His presence. Jacob's ladder was the beginning of something much bigger, something that continues to impact us to this day. Jacob's ladder was not just a symbol of connection between heaven and earth. It was also a representation of the spiritual journey that each of us is called to take. Each step on that ladder represented a step towards the divine, an advance in spiritual understanding and closeness to God. Jacob's journey, like ours, was full of challenges, uncertainties, and moments of reflection. However, this vision made him realize that no matter how distant it might seem, there was always a path to reconnect with the Creator. The ladder is, in essence, God's invitation to this personal ascension. Spiritual ascension is an individual journey, and each person must climb their own ladder in search of a deeper relationship with God. For Jacob, this ladder appeared in a moment of crisis, when he was running away and feeling completely lost. Often, our own spiritual journeys also begin in times of difficulty. It is when we feel further away from the divine that the way back reveals itself. And just like Jacob, we are called to climb, one step at a time, moving forward with faith and confidence, even if we cannot see the top of the ladder. This spiritual journey also teaches us that ascension is not immediate. It is an ongoing process. Each step represents a learning experience, a moment of transformation. Jacob did not climb the ladder in his dream, but the vision was a reminder that the path was there, available to him. In the same way, God offers us the opportunity to climb, to grow spiritually, but it is up to us to accept the invitation and begin the journey. The ladder teaches us about patience, perseverance, and the importance of trusting the process, knowing that each step takes us closer to divine purpose. Ultimately, Jacob's ladder is a symbol of hope and opportunity. Each of us has the chance to rise, to seek a deeper connection with the divine. And this journey is not something we do alone. Just as the angels ascended and descended alongside Jacob, God walks with us on every step, offering strength and guidance. The spiritual journey is personal, but never lonely. Jacob's ladder continues to call to us, reminding us that there is always a way to God, regardless of where we are in our walk of faith. Jacob's journey was not just physical. It was a journey of redemption, marked by transformation and reconciliation. From the beginning, Jacob carried the weight of his actions, the guilt of having deceived his brother Esau and his father Isaac. The escape was just an attempt to escape the consequences, but God had other plans. The vision of the stairs was the turning point in his life, a reminder that redemption was within his reach and that he didn't need to keep running. Jacob's journey teaches us that no matter how far we may feel from God, there is always a way back. Jacob's redemption began with the recognition of his mistakes, but was sealed by God's promise. He was not only given a new chance, but also a new identity. The one who fled would become the patriarch of a great nation. And just like Jacob, we all have moments when we need to face our mistakes and seek reconciliation, whether with those we have hurt or with ourselves. The story of Jacob reminds us that redemption is not something unattainable, but a divine offer, ready to be accepted by those who are willing to change. Along his journey, Jacob experienced ups and downs. He had to deal with the fear of meeting his brother, the difficulties of his life with Laban, and the challenges of leading his own family. However, at each stage, he was shaped by God, learning to trust and grow closer to his Creator. His redemption was a process, a gradual transformation that culminated in his reunion with Esau, where, instead of hostility, he found forgiveness. Jacob's redemption teaches us that the path to reconciliation is often long but always worth it. Jacob's journey is a living example that God does not give up on us, even when we make mistakes. He offers us the chance for redemption, and it is up to us to accept it. Just like Jacob, we can transform our lives and find peace, even amid the consequences of our actions. And the ladder that Jacob saw in his dream is the symbol of this redemption, an open path where God is always willing to welcome us back. Redemption is more than forgiveness. It is the chance to start over and live fully in the divine purpose. Jacob was alone when he saw the vision of the ladder. In the midst of his escape, away from his family and everything he knew, he lay down in a deserted place, not knowing that there, in that seemingly unimportant setting, God would find him. This story teaches us a powerful truth. God reveals himself in the places we least expect. In moments of loneliness and despair, when it seems like there is no way out, the divine can surprise us, bringing a new perspective and showing us that we are never truly alone. The loneliness Jacob experienced that night was more than physical. It was also emotional and spiritual. He ran away from his choices, his mistakes, and was immersed in fear and uncertainty. And how many times do we also find ourselves in this state, feeling that we are distant from everything and everyone, including God? However, it is precisely in these moments that the divine presence manifests itself most clearly. Jacob's vision reminds us that even when all seems lost, God is there, ready to guide us back to the right path. Jacob's encounter with God in that desert place is an example of how the divine can transform even the most unlikely scenarios into places of revelation and change. We often wait for God to manifest himself in great moments or important events, but, just as happened with Jacob, he can find us in the most everyday situations, in the darkest nights. That lonely place became sacred because God manifested himself there. Likewise, the simplest moments in our lives can become transformative when we are open to the divine presence. This story of Jacob challenges us to reconsider our own moments of loneliness. Perhaps what appears to be a void or a desert in our lives is, in fact, an opportunity for a profound encounter with God. The ladder that Jacob saw is the symbol that the divine is within our reach, even in the most difficult moments. And like him, we can emerge from these moments of loneliness renewed, with a new perspective and a new mission. Are we prepared to find God where we least expect it? Jacob's dream of seeing a ladder that connected earth to heaven reflects the desire of all humanity. to ascend spiritually and find the divine. On our journey through life, many of us seek that connection. We long for a greater purpose and a deeper relationship with God. The ladder that Jacob saw was not just a private vision, but a universal symbol of the spiritual quest. Each step we climb takes us closer to a greater truth, a deeper understanding of who we are and our relationship with the Creator. Climbing this ladder, however, is not an easy task. Just like in any growth process, there are challenges, moments of uncertainty, and even falls. But every obstacle we encounter is an opportunity to climb another step, to strengthen ourselves spiritually. Jacob showed us that, even in the midst of flight and fear, he was able to see a way to heaven. This is the dream of all of us, to overcome adversity and rise spiritually, trusting that the divine is always within our reach. This dream of climbing the ladder to heaven is not just individual, it is also collective. Just as Jacob's descendants inherited the divine promise, we too can share this quest with those around us. As we grow spiritually, we influence and inspire others to also begin their journeys. Jacob's ladder reminds us that the search for the divine is an ongoing process, and that there are always more steps to climb. Each of us is called to walk this path, carrying with us the hope of a deeper encounter with God. In the end, Jacob's ladder teaches us that the dream of all of us, the search for a life more connected to the divine, is possible. No matter where we are, there is always a path that takes us closer to God. The question is, are we ready to accept the invitation? Just like Jacob, who in his solitude found a vision of hope, we too can find our own ladder, our own path of spiritual ascension. The dream of ascending to heaven is, in fact, God's calling for each of us. The secret behind Jacob's ladder has finally been revealed. The path to God has always been open, and that connection is accessible to all of us. Jacob's dream, which began as a private vision in a moment of despair, turned into an eternal promise for all humanity. The ladder is not just a passage between heaven and earth. It is a symbol of hope, faith, and spiritual renewal. God, in His infinite mercy, extended this bridge so that all of us could draw closer to Him, regardless of our faults and circumstances. Throughout Jacob's life, we have seen that the path to God is not linear, but full of ups and downs, challenges, and moments of doubt. Still, the ladder remained there, as a guarantee that the connection with the divine would not be severed. This is the greatest lesson we can take from this story. The path to God is always available to us, waiting for us to accept the invitation to climb. And just like Jacob, we are called to trust that, even in the most uncertain times, God guides and protects us on our spiritual journey. The legacy of Jacob's ladder lives on today. He reminds us that the search for the divine is an ongoing process, and that regardless of where we are on our journey, there are always more steps to climb. The promise made to Jacob that night at Bethel was a reminder that God is always near, offering His presence and protection. The secret of the ladder is not just ancient history. It is a living truth, a promise that the path to heaven is open to all who are willing to follow. Now, it's up to each of us to decide, are we ready to climb that ladder? The secret has been revealed, the path is clear. All we need to do is trust, take the first step, and continue our journey of faith. Just like Jacob, we are invited to rise, to seek more, to connect with the divine in a deep and transformative way. And in doing so, we discover that the path to God has never been closer than it is now.
If you're interested in having a Bible like the one we use in our studies, check out the link in the first pinned comment. If you enjoy our content and can support our channel, consider buying us a coffee through Buy Me a Coffee. Additionally, if you can purchase a crucifix, we also have a link in the first pinned comment. We greatly appreciate your support. God bless, and see you in the next video.